Devshi, I'm so excited for this. I want to kick off by reading a part of your bio. I feel like I know you pretty well. We followed you along on this journey. And then I read it, and it says she has accumulated extensive experience applying deep learning algorithms to protect the progression of retinal diseases, train robotic agents, and perform natural language processing on legal corpora. So we'll dig into the NLP, of course, and legal corpora later in the episode, but tell us a little bit about retinal diseases and robotic agents.
My first introduction to the world of AI was in 2016. This was the summer after my freshman year in college. I had accepted an internship opportunity at a research lab out in Beijing, China. I was working with this incredible lab that was focused on like more fundamental biology and physics research. And the lab director at the time, he was really excited to have me on board because he had heard of this exciting new thing called deep learning. And he said, you know what? She's a computer science wizard. She can help us out with processing and analyzing some of these cancer cell images that we're collecting a little bit more efficiently. And so he kind of gave me a very high level overview of what he wanted me to accomplish. And little did he know at the time, I had truly only taken an introductory Python and C course, and I was a little bit overwhelmed. But this was my first summer. This was my first internship. I was committed to doing whatever I could. And so I kind of just dived right in. I started researching the very fundamentals of machine learning, making my way over to gradient descent, to learning how neural networks work, how you come up with training and validation data sets, to convolutional neural nets. And honestly, like the more I learned about this field, the more I was just blown away. It was crazy to me that you could just string together all these mathematical functions and accomplish all these really, really incredible and complicated tasks. And so by the end of that summer, I had a working prototype for them that would take in all the cancer cell images that they were collecting and produce, the image segmentation. And so that was exciting. But I think the bigger takeaway for me for that summer was, holy crap, like I've discovered this whole new field that I don't think a lot of people are talking about at the time. And I want to pursue this further. I want to see where I can take this interest. And so the following summer, I interned at Google Brain, which seemed like the mecca of deep learning at the time. I was so excited to have that opportunity. It was just cool being able to hear from the research scientists directly that I had been reading about for so long. After that, I went to Microsoft Research, I went to DeepMind. And so I was, just had this incredible opportunity to work on some projects that were more NLP focused, others were more computer vision focused. There were also, amazing work that was being done on robotics. So that's kind of what that line in the bio is referring to. But honestly, I'm just that was the foundation and the genesis for me eventually doing the work that I am today.
Yeah, and it was the right tour of some of the most interesting labs doing this. So it doesn't surprise me that created a good springboard. So now on to AI and legal. Not just because I'm an investor. I think JusticeText is a great example of using AI for good. So I'd love our listeners to get acquainted with its origin story. What inspired you and your co-founder to create JusticeText, and say a little bit about what it is as well.
So Leslie and I, we met on our very first day as undergraduate students at the University of Chicago. Both of us were studying computer science. We were in the same house. We also did the same pre-orientation program. And so there were a lot of different touch points for us in the very early days that eventually led us to becoming co-founders. But it's just really cool to reflect on that because the pre-orientation program that we did together was actually focused on social justice and community leadership. So topics that are pretty different from what we actually studied for all of our, computer science coursework. But I think it set the tone for how I spent my time as a college student in so many ways. 3 months into our freshman year on campus is when the Chicago Police Department released the dashcam footage documenting the police murder of a 17-year-old unarmed Black American boy. His name was Laquan McDonald. And if you look at that video, it's truly horrifying. Laquan was the same age as both Leslie and myself. And I think in that moment, I just reflected on the fact that as a 17-year-old, I was moving to a new city, starting my college experience, meeting all these cool new friends. And Laquan, for no reason that anyone could justifiably come up with, had been taken from this world for being born poor and Black in Chicago. And I think for me, one of the things that I spent a lot of time reflecting on and just learning about in the next couple of years was this history of racialized policing in the city. And it was really cool to see how my local community started to organize against a lot of this injustice. I would, go to the local church and just see how people were coming together, organizing after school programs. I would see how, there were so many teachers and pastors who would just come together and fight for justice in the wake of a local government that had failed to provide that safety and security for them for so long. And I think a lot of those conversations and just the people that I was meeting was really inspiring. Going into my senior year, I knew that I had to do something. I had no idea what that would look like. What I had studied, the skills that I had were as a computer science student. And so what Leslie and I ended up doing was cold calling our local public defender's office, basically telling them, hey guys, we're two college students with extra time on our hands. We'd love to help you guys out however we can. And honestly, in that very first conversation, they told us that we as public defenders are getting absolutely flooded with the volume of body-worn camera footage, interrogation videos, jail calls that we're receiving in our day-to-day caseloads. And we don't have a good system for getting through that. You guys are two computer scientists. Maybe you can help us out. And so that was the genesis of JusticeText. This was really just a side project that we built for a handful of attorneys in our city. And over time realized that the problem is so much bigger than what we initially realized.
Well, I love it's just such a typical startup story where you're meeting customers and you're serving an unmet need. And, you guys were activists and not instead of, but in addition to your fury about what was happening, you said, let's figure out sort of a more systemic solution. So for those of us who aren't familiar with sort of the day-to-day work of public defenders, can you go into a little bit more, maybe like a case example of what sort of they're up against? And then when JusticeText comes in, how is that helpful?
Public defenders are representing low-income individuals who otherwise cannot afford an attorney. In many ways, they are that last line of defense to help this individual navigate this grueling, bureaucratic criminal legal system that we have in America. And unfortunately, public defenders today are grappling with incredibly high caseloads to the point where in some jurisdictions, they estimate the average public defender only has around 10 minutes to spend on an individual case. And due to that, this issue that we stumbled upon with body cams is really fascinating because in addition to these high caseloads, all of a sudden, over the past 10 years, these attorneys are also receiving hours and hours of body-worn camera footage of these jail calls, of 911 calls as part of each case. This footage can be incredibly powerful. Previously, an attorney would have to just rely on what was written in the police report and kind of take that at face value. All of a sudden, they have access to this data that can help them corroborate that information and actually get to the truth of what may have transpired during that police interaction. But it's very hard to say that all this footage is actually leading to greater accountability if they don't have the tools, resources, time, infrastructure to actually be able to go through it. So that's why we built a solution that essentially allows attorneys to upload all of that data onto JusticeText. Within minutes, they'll get an automated transcription that they can search through. They'll get summaries of all that information. We will look out for key moments. When was someone Mirandized? When was someone administered a field sobriety test? When were they placed under arrest? Did the client ever request a lawyer? And then attorneys can use that platform to create video exhibits that they actually use in court to potentially impeach an opposing witness or to use as part of their opening or closing presentation. And so if I had to share an example, there's an attorney out in Northern California who had received a case where her client's vehicle had been searched. Her client was Spanish speaking. And, in the police report, it had just been written as, we searched the car, we found XYZ. That's why this individual is now detained. When she actually looked at the video, when she uploaded it to JusticeText, what she was able to identify was her Spanish speaking client had never been read his rights. And in fact, the officer had indicated to the English speaking friend to just tell him to go along with it. And that was just a very small, brief encounter that could have been brushed aside. And all of, the paperwork that you're getting for a given case, it's hard to find just like those 3 seconds where the officer is saying, hey, just tell him to accept. But because of having a tool that made it easy to navigate all this video, she was able to clip out that portion, impeach the cop during a hearing, and get the case dismissed. And so I think that's just a small example of how when you give public defenders the tools to actually sift through this footage, that's when you get true accountability. That's when you get that true transparency in the system.
What made you decide to do this as a company versus, for example, a 501c3?
There's a lot of things that I could say about this, but I guess what I'll start off with is the right to a strong and well-resourced public defender system. That's a constitutional right. That's a mandate that the state needs to be taking on and needs to be investing in. And so we're not selling to legal aid organizations that are doing this as kind of, out of their own goodwill. This is a responsibility of the state as part of the democracy that we live in. And unfortunately, we live in a country where in many jurisdictions, the police department's overtime budget is greater than the entire budget of the public defender's office. And what that contributes to is an environment where technology vendors, they look at the criminal justice space, they look where there's opportunity. They realize there's a lot of budget for tech and innovation on police and prosecutions side of things. And so that's where a lot of the cool new technology ends up being built. We don't think that's how the system should operate. We think public defenders should have, a line item in their budget to be able to invest in high-tech solutions, to be able to invest in sustainable innovation. And for us, it was definitely an uphill battle because hardly any of the public defender agencies that we initially started selling to had a line item for video analysis tools. By and large, they just invested in case management things and Microsoft Office. And so I think the case that we've been trying to make is, no, we should go to the county board legislature. We should go to the state legislature and tell them that this is something that you need to be able to uphold that constitutional right. And this is something that's going to make you a lot more efficient. And so I think from the beginning, one thing that we realized is that if we give JusticeText as a free resource, it's simply not going to be successful because it takes a lot of hard work and effort and, just like thought and intentionality on the public defender side to be able to roll this out efficiently. And so when they go through all of that process of getting that budget approved, that's when, JusticeText becomes a core part of their workflow that we can then double down on. And then from our side, it's one thing to kind of just build a fun school project and give it away for free. But if we want to continue hiring the best engineers, if we want to continue incorporating the latest technology in JusticeText and expanding more file formats on our platform and providing that constant support, we need to be able to fund that ourselves. And so we can either spend a good chunk of our time, going out and seeking charitable grant funding, which is a fine option, or we can go directly to the source, directly to the customers that we're trying to serve, and make sure that this is something that they're actually willing to pay for. So that's kind of how we've thought about it and our positioning in this space.
Well, it makes sense, especially to have the kind of the connection of the customers, the fact that they have to, they have to adopt their work process as part of it. So engaging in a customer relationship versus a what may be tools that they never invest in as part of doing it. Isn't one of the things that then adds to your challenge that there's limited budgets? It's how do people get persuaded this is something to kind of pay attention to? Like, what does the sales cycle look like? Because it's almost like you're creating a new market here.
Yeah, and that's been a really fulfilling part of this journey, honestly, because we truly are sitting down with a lot of public defense leaders, very well respected folks who are then coming to us and asking for advice on, hey, how can we pitch this technology? I have a county board meeting coming up. Many times we are co-creating narratives with them. We are putting together entire data sheets, fact sheets, to help them make that case. And over the past year and a half, we've noticed that public defenders have been able to make this case successfully. And that's been really exciting to see, actually. When it comes to navigating procurement, there's so many different options that you can go through. Sometimes, there's like a competitive bidding process. Sometimes you might be below the threshold of what needs to be put out for a competitive bid. Sometimes, if you have a very differentiated solution, you can go through sole source procurement. So for us, we've had a huge learning curve of understanding what's the best way to partner with these government agencies and navigate those sales cycles. But honestly, I think that's become like one of our core competencies at this point. And we really started off as just like two college students knocking on a lot of folks' doors. And people have seen us over the years just continue to keep at it and continue to grow the scale of our impact. I was at a conference with a lot of public defense leaders earlier this year, and so many of them had a memory of getting a cold email from me when I was like a senior in college. And it was just cool because I feel like they recognize our genuine interest and motivation in serving them. And for that reason, they've been willing to kind of give us tips and tricks on how to navigate kind of the sales and procurement side of things as well.
So I love the idea that you're not going to let the government, the federal government, the local government, whatever, like pass the buck on this responsibility. You're like, no. This cannot be legal aid. This is in the Constitution. Like, you guys have to do this and you have to pay for it. So it is meaningful to you. Can you give us an idea of who and where you're serving so we have an idea of your scale? And then obviously you were created to help public defenders. And you said you want to get to sort of truth and accountability. But do prosecutors use you? Is that okay? Like, how do you think of the flip side of the coin?
Yeah, we're working with around 60 individual public defender agencies at the moment. And that includes entire statewide systems like Tennessee and Massachusetts, where we rolled out earlier this year. Major cities like Portland, Houston, Austin, which is where I am right now. But also small, like rural public defender agencies with maybe 5 attorneys. And it's actually been a challenge to figure out, us as a technology provider, what does that customer support, that customer success function look like for us when we're serving a massive system with a lot of resources, a training director versus a much smaller office that may not have a lot of in-house technical support. And so that's been really interesting because if you're trying to work with public defenders in America, you have to recognize that the delivery model is very different, county by county, state by state. I think one thing that we tell all of our partners is that you're not just getting a piece of software. We will sit down with you. We will do office hours with any attorney who wants it. We will train them. We will come visit you in person. And that's just been such a critical part of being able to serve this community, given how overwhelmed and overworked a lot of them are. And then on the other side of things, I think we have been very focused on public defenders, indigent defense from day one. I think it's core to our ethos, just recognizing that there are a lot of folks who are building cool new tech solutions for prosecutors, for police. But this is a very, very serious and needed gap that we can focus on. We have branched out to private criminal defense attorneys. And so they may be representing individuals who do have the means to hire a lawyer. And so I do think there's adjacent communities, adjacent markets that we have already started to serve, where there's a lot of opportunity for growth and expansion. But I do think we have stayed true to our mission of focusing on the defense in our journey up until now.
So let's bring in a clip from a public defender that works with you.
Being able to upload almost all forms of audio, whether it's a court hearing or body-worn camera footage, radio traffic or witness interviews, and then being able to search the accompanying text, make clips, add subtitles, and download excerpts is incredibly helpful. So, for example, I recently had a case with about 1,000 body-worn camera clips, and there's no question that we were using JusticeText, at least we were the most prepared attorneys in the room, having been able to evaluate each and every minute of the digital evidence to find bits and pieces that furthered our defense and highlighted problems with the state's case. In that particular case, the state would call a witness without any prior notice. We could use JusticeText to access that officer's body-worn camera in real time, scan through the transcript while the officer was testifying, and gather impeachment material.
That's a clear, awesome use of JusticeText. What are kind of features that are being asked for, or what are the kind of additional products to elevate the game here and make sure that folks who are using public and eventually private defenders too to have a kind of a robust defense?
One really fascinating request that has only come up over the last couple months is the ability to actually upload a police report, and then for us to use kind of our AI assistant, our generative AI capabilities to automatically flag potential inconsistencies between what was captured on footage and what was written in that police report. We've also heard folks ask us about, I'd love to be able to just like find every instance in which this red car showed up on video. We've also not done as much of the visual analysis component, but I think it's something that more and more people are asking for. So yeah, those two areas we're really excited about.
One of the reasons you want to be a for-profit and get the best engineers and have the latest technology is so you can always be updating your tools, whether that's because new technology is arising, whether that's because new use cases are coming up, you're talking to new customers. Would you mind running us through a demo of a new feature of JusticeText?
Yeah, 100%. So essentially, what I'm showing you right now is the JusticeText platform, where if you're an attorney, you can go ahead and upload your audio and video discovery. I have uploaded a dash cam video in a courtroom proceeding to this case folder. And one of our most recent features on the platform is an AI assistant that we call MirandaAI. What MirandaAI can do is take an entire case folder's worth of discovery, whether that's dozens of phone calls or dash cam videos. It will scan across all of them, generate a 5 to 10 sentence summary of the main topics of conversation, and then you can actually interact with MirandaAI and ask it high-level natural language questions that help you discover all of that or understand that evidence better. So I can ask it to generate a timeline of key events. This is one of the core functions of what a defense attorney is trying to accomplish, especially if they're getting body cam videos from multiple different officer perspectives, and they're just trying to piece together who said what at what time. Having access to this tool can be really powerful. We had an attorney out in Oregon who was able to use MirandaAI to build a high-level timeline of multiple different officer perspectives. And he basically said that the response he got in a matter of 30 seconds was the same thing that he had compiled over hours and hours of poring over all of the footage. And so another thing that you can ask this tool is, this is a DUI stop. Is there any evidence of intoxication? And what the tool will do is when it generates its responses, it will reference a very specific file and timestamp. And so if an attorney is using JusticeText and they want to cross-reference any of the responses that this assistant is giving them, you can do that very easily just by hovering over that response. It's something that we highly emphasize when we train new attorneys on JusticeText as well, because like with any AI tool, there are possibilities of, information that may be left out.
Thank you so much. This is fantastic. And I think obviously, with AI, a lot of the worries are about what's going to happen to jobs. And I share those concerns. And I am so worried about what's going to happen over the next, 2, 3, 5, 10 years. But I think this gives a great example of AI that is helping folks do their jobs. And they're not taking away anyone's job because these are jobs that just weren't getting done. This is stuff that underfunded public defenders, departments, underfunded legal folks who are trying to do the right thing, they just didn't have the time to do this. And so without the technology, it just wouldn't happen.
No, I appreciate that point because the work that draws public defenders into choosing this line of work is wanting to help people in their community, is wanting to, um, you know, provide alternatives to our incarceration, to understand their perspectives, understand their limitations. It's really that like human-centered work. A lot of public defenders love being able to show up as, friends and confidants to the clients that they're serving. And unfortunately, just the grueling nature of their work takes away from a lot of that fulfillment many times. These attorneys are getting burnt out. I hear from a lot of offices that are suffering from retention issues. And so the way we think about it is how can technology help them double down and focus on the work that initially drew them to this profession in the first place?
So one of the things about entrepreneurs who go into this is you now have a kind of good understanding of the market, the ecosystem, the network, what's going on. What do you think are the key elements of kind of technological support to try to, best balance the as it were the under-resourced within the judicial system?
The reason why the intersection between government and technology is so exciting is because low income communities in this country, communities of color, disproportionately rely on the government to operate efficiently, whether that's for subsidized healthcare services, whether that's for social security benefits, whether that's food stamps, legal services, what have you. And for the longest time, we simply have not delivered a reasonable user experience to these communities. We've been okay with inefficient systems, with government forms that don't work, or having to call, some hotline that doesn't pick up 10 days in a row before you can actually get a resolution. And, if things like our DoorDash app work so seamlessly and so efficiently, like we can strive for better within our government services. And that's why I'm super excited about the potential for technology to be incorporated by different agencies to solve their specific needs. As an outsider, I would have never known public defenders are struggling with body cams. So I can't even tell you the specifics of how this technology can be used or applied. But I think it's kind of a culture shift around our government agencies thinking about what are the unnecessary inefficiencies in how we deliver our services and how can we address them. There's so much low-hanging fruit. You don't even need generative AI. Sometimes it's just a basic type form or a Calendly integration that could truly cut down on hours and hours of work that someone is currently, manually pouring over. So you really don't even need to use the most high-tech, fancy technology to have a really big impact in this space.
So going on that same theme of local governments being able to utilize technology, to your point, to be able to provide better government services, I do think actually this is like a key, like people would believe more in democracy and government if our government worked for them, even if it was as simple as filing taxes or whatever it might be. But do you think that these local governments are starting to shift their perspective on AI? Or when you mention AI, is that a positive, a negative? Are people nervous? Does that make them excited? Like, how does that interplay with, all of the new media around AI and its capabilities, both for good and bad?
That's a really good question because I have seen such a stark shift in how these governments are thinking about AI over the past 6 months or so. Um, we are getting AI questionnaires from every county, every state. They have entire written policies that they want our responses on. As a technology vendor, how are you storing your data? How are you securing it? What are you training? Or what are you using to train these models? Are you using our data to train these models? And honestly, I think it's an incredible step in the right direction, because the answer can't be we're not going to use AI, or we're not going to touch this technology. Let's ban it outright. I think local governments are realizing that there's a lot of potential here, but they also need to be concerned with the potential risks. Like, a lot of this data is not public information, and if it's used to train, a lot of these public models, that could seriously harm a lot of folks. And so, I've personally been excited to see this. It creates more work for us, honestly. Like, we have a lot more that we need to do to get JusticeText vetted and get it over the line when we're going through that sales and procurement process. But I think this is the start of a really cool era in which I think governments want to be on the cutting edge of this technology, and do so in a responsible manner.
Have you thought about what are the other things that could be part of the, as it were, public infrastructure? Like, does it make sense to have software API inclusions in body cams or other kinds of things that would help the, the kind of the justice process? And what kinds of things would those be?
Definitely. I think one of the big challenges in operating within the criminal justice space has been, um, you have a lot of different players who are creating proprietary technology that isn't interoperable with, their competitor system. And it goes all the way from jail call providers, all the way to who's recording the courtroom proceedings, to, of course, the body cams. And I think it really is going to have to be local governments that push a lot of these vendors to create APIs and a greater ability for other systems to interact with their own. Because honestly, in building JusticeText, that's been a huge hurdle that we've been encountering, and actually made really great progress towards. We get a lot of proprietary file formats. Sometimes we go to a county and 80% of the footage that they're receiving requires a special file player to be able to view. And attorneys are spending more time trying to get that file to play than they are even reviewing it in some cases. And so we've reverse engineered a lot of these proprietary file formats so that they upload and operate seamlessly on JusticeText. But that's not necessarily what we should have to do. These private vendors shouldn't have so much say and authority in those types of decisions. There's also risks. We definitely don't want to be contributing to an environment where every action anyone makes while walking on a public street can be easily surveilled and used for analyses by their local government that they may not be consenting to. And so when it comes to the use of that hardware and software, I think that's something that we all have to be wary of. But yeah, I definitely think there's potentials for more integration.
So one question I love to ask entrepreneurs is, if you had a phone line that goes through time and you could call your younger self, to not with, oh, and the world looks like this, or, talk to Sue, but don't talk to Bob, but like a decisioning learning algorithm, like what to do more of, what to do less of. What would you tell your younger self?
I think for me, what I would tell my younger self is build up that skill of delegation, because it is genuinely so cool and it's so beautiful when you bring on a new team member, you show that trust in them, you give them a responsibility, and they're able to execute it better than you ever could have imagined. And the best leaders that I see are the ones who are able to surround themselves with other stellar individuals and just inspire them to do big things. And it's something that I continue to strive for and am actively working on. But I think this next stage of scaling JusticeText is really going to be about investing in the people that I work with, and just, thinking about their leadership journey and growth.
So on that note, give us a little bit of a preview, and you can answer this however you like. Like, what is the future for JusticeText? Are there adjacent fields? Do you want to be in all 50 states? Do you have a 5-year vision? Like, just give us a little bit about the future for you guys and what you're shooting for.
We are in a time of really rapid growth right now. We are close to finalizing 2 additional statewide partnerships in addition to the 2 states that we're already fully deployed in. We have tons of like growing interest in states where there's, increasing pools of funding for discovery and body cam analysis and all sorts of stuff. So I think we're at a really, really exciting point in our journey where I'm very, very motivated to continue pushing forward and continuing to get our product into the hands of more public defenders. We recently partnered with this really incredible organization called Zealous. They're focused on media and storytelling to combat outdated narratives around criminal justice in the country and to push forward like a more progressive view of what public safety looks like. And we partnered with them to make a video about our work in Kentucky with their public defenders. And so we did a road trip around the state, met a lot of our attorneys, told their stories, thought that was beautiful. That was fantastic. So I'm excited to share that. And I'm excited to do more things like that. And then lastly, on the product side, it really is what I was talking about earlier. Just the advancements in generative AI, it seems like every week there's something new going on that we need to keep an eye out for. And so whether that's using LLMs to analyze more of that written discovery, analyze police reports, or start doing more of that visual analysis, I think that's where a lot of Leslie, who's my co-founder, where he's going to be focused over the next couple months.
Is there a movie, song, or book that fills you with optimism for the future?
There's this one movie, this Indian movie called Queen, which honestly is probably one of my favorites. It's about a young woman who was essentially left at the altar and decided to go on her honeymoon to Europe by herself. And she had never left her small village in India before then, and, shows up in Paris, not really knowing the language, not understanding a lot of the cultural nuances. And so there's a lot of miscommunication that takes place, a lot of embarrassing moments. But she pushes through that and she builds a life for herself. She is able to decenter this idea that marriage is the one and true source of value in her life. And honestly, it's just like such a cool and beautiful story. So me personally, as a young woman who comes from a culture where women aren't always able to travel the world, start their own companies, and live life on their own terms, I think watching that movie means a lot and fills me with optimism as well.
There's a lot of things to fix in the world, but it's also pretty cool to think about how far we've come as a gender, as a species, as all of the things. Rapid fire number 2. What is a question that you wish people would ask you more often?
I love talking about my experiences solo traveling, living abroad. I spent a good chunk of time over the past 2 years living in Latin America. So did my co-founder. And, when you show up in a country where you don't know a single soul, where you don't know the language, and you still have to fend for yourself, you learn a lot about yourself.
So where do you see progress or momentum outside of your industry that inspires you?
I am really inspired by how multicultural a lot of the stories that are being told in the media are now. If you go to Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, it's really cool to see a lot of just like niche stories, niche communities, having entire movies or entire TV shows made about them and their lived experiences. Especially when you live in a country like the United States that is so deeply multicultural. And unfortunately, also to this day, pretty segregated. There's no way that you're going to have the lived experience of every other American. So yeah, I'm excited to see more and more untold stories come to life on screen.
Can you leave us with a final thought on what you think is possible in the next 15 years if everything breaks humanity's way, and what's the first step to get there?
One thing that I think a lot about is how a lot of the power of AI and automation has been restricted to the world of software up until now. Like, how do you take enormous amounts of data and synthesize it efficiently and quickly? But there's a lot of very intelligent people who are working on how do you use, you know, physical objects, whether that's cars or robots, little vacuum cleaners to automate parts of our day-to-day physical lives. And I think about that in the context of the burden of domestic labor, especially on women. So many women are now breadwinners in their family, or you know pursuing these incredibly fulfilling careers and still grappling with the incredible burden of managing the household, of taking care of all these kids and all their activities. How can that next wave of AI, of automation, help alleviate some of that burden so that families can focus on the things that matter the most, which is spending time with one another? I think this has implications on elder care as well. I think I hear from so many friends who have grandparents that, are struggling with this new era in their life where they don't have a lot of people that can talk to them. They're not physically able to do the things that bring them joy. And unfortunately, working parents are already incredibly overwhelmed. So I don't really have any answers, but I'm very, very excited to see how a lot of innovation kind of on the hardware side of things can help to address some of those burdens.
Possible is produced by Wonder Media Network. It's hosted by Aria Finger and me, Reid Hoffman. Our showrunner is Sean Young. Possible is produced by Katie Sanders, Edie Allard, Sarah Schleid, Adrian Bain, and Paloma Moreno Jimenez. Jenny Kaplan is our executive producer and editor.
Special thanks to Surya Yalamanchili, Saida Sapieva, Ian Alice, Greg Beato, Parth Patil, and Ben Relis. And a big thanks to Jonathan Irvin and Little Monster Media Company.